Okay, so good evening, everybody. My name's Helen. I work for Devon Wildlife Trust on the Green Minds project in Plymouth. Devon Wildlife Trust are a partner on this exciting Plymouth City Council-led project, which is funded by the European Regional Development Fund's Urban Innovative Actions. And it's a unique opportunity to bring our experience and enthusiasm for wildlife and nature to the green and blue spaces in a large city like Plymouth. And it's all about making space for nature while helping local people reconnect with the natural world and getting all the physical and mental health benefits we know this can bring. So it's a bit of a win-win situation. And you can look out for future events like this and lots more information about the project if you check out the greenmindsplymouth.com website. So that's enough for me, little intro, quick intro, and on to this evening's talk. Tonight we're going to learn all about how we can bring urban landscapes like Plymouth back to life. Our speaker is Harry Barton, Chief Executive of Devon Wildlife Trust. And in this presentation, Harry will discuss threats that face our wildlife and how we can all take action to help wildlife in urban places like Plymouth. And inspiring examples of what's been achieved elsewhere can help us to give us ideas about the possibilities. So thanks, Harry, for coming tonight, and over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Helen. And it's great to be talking about urban wildlife because I spend so much of my time talking about wildlife in rural areas, but actually the opportunities to do things for wildlife in urban areas are so massive now. And I think in many ways, I think the greatest hope for the future of wildlife in many ways is in urban areas. So Devon is an interesting county, Devon Wildlife Trust. When I came down here, I thought like most people of Devon as very much a rural county. And of course it is, 75% of it is agriculture. We've got 2 national parks, but we've also got some big urban areas, Plymouth over 250,000 and Torbay and Exeter both well over 100,000 people. So we've got lots of great urban potential here in Devon. And if I can just get my presentation to move on. I hate it when this happens, don't you? Right, now, what's happened to my machine? Yes, there we are. Okay, so hopefully you can now see an urban, an aerial view. In this case, it's Exeter, but it could be anywhere. And you take an aerial picture like this of a city, and it's immediately apparent how much green space we've got. Would you believe it? 47% of London, one of the densest, largest cities in the world, 47% of London is green space. And that green space takes on many forms, and it's not all equal. There's green space and green space. So you can see here in this picture, there's some nice woodlands, there's some other bits and pieces, and then on the top of the right-hand side, top right hand of the picture, you can see some very sort of closely managed land. That's also green space. An awful lot less good for nature than some of the woodland you can see right in the middle of the picture there. And this is the giveaway, that's the River Exe, highly canalized river. Again, not much, that is, it's not built on it, perhaps it's green or blue space, but again, not of great quality, that bit of it anyway, for nature. So we have green space and we have wildlife rich green space, 2 very, very different things in our urban areas. And I think the green space we've got really falls into sort of 4 or 5 different categories. And the first one is the public open spaces. So here on the left, we've got Lardwell Valley Park. That's my favourite of the 6 valley parks. We've got an Exeter. On the right, we've got Willinscombe Park here in Plymouth. Some fantastic parks, actually, we've got in both cities. We're really, really lucky with what we've got here in the southwest. Then you've also got all the private gardens and allotments, and you can see straight away why these are great for wildlife. They're generally quite small and quite sort of compact, but there's so much variety, so much topographic variety here. You've got the high emergent trees, you've got the smaller trees, the scrubby bits, you've got the quite the closely mown short grass, you've got the longer grass, you've got all these other bits and pieces, the messy bits. All that variety, that heterogeneity is so important for wildlife. Messiness is so good for wildlife. Tidiness is a terrible enemy of wildlife. So these messy places I absolutely love. And the total area of gardens, I've said the total area of gardens, I can't remember what the figure is, but it's an alarming, it's not an alarming, it's an amazingly big figure, much bigger than the whole area of Dartmoor National Park. It's the combined area of urban gardens we've got in this country. Amazing. The third thing we tend to have in urban areas is these linear features. So here on the left, you can see this rather nice illustrated map produced by West Country Rivers Trust showing the River Plym. And although, yes, it's pictorial to an extent, but you can see how important these rivers are. So the River Plym and its tributaries, the Meavy and the Tory Brook, and how they really connect the city centre to the surrounding landscape. And as you can see on the right, this is the Plym Valley Trail, and this was once a highly industrialized area. And I used to spend my time as a child. I spent a lot of my childhood in London, and I used to spend a lot of my time walking along these old redundant railway tracks. And actually, the sort of, the fact that no one was really doing anything on the sides of these old redundant tracks meant that you get all sorts of interesting rural communities and a lot of other urban wildlife. They're fantastic things for wildlife. These and we get them along, old railway tracks, rivers, roads, etc. And then, of course, here particularly in Torbay and Plymouth, we've got the marine, we've got the seafront itself. And I love this slide because it shows how wildlife has this ability to gain a foothold in the most unexpected places, in this case, a wall right facing the sea and the full force of the western gales. I think we're incredibly lucky here to have this very, very special seafront environment. And then, of course, if you go a few tens of meters out into the sea, you've got some of these incredible habitats there. And it's amazing to think that when you stand and looking over a view like you were on the last slide, you won't go drop down into the sea, and you will see some of these habitats right down there. And of course, marine, we've got one of the most important marine areas in the whole of the United Kingdom, just off the waterfront in Plymouth, very much part of the city. And the final category, and to me, in some ways, the most exciting one is this. It's the derelict land category. We've got huge amounts of derelict land in our cities, all over the UK, and Plymouth, Exeter, Torbay, no exception. So I just love this slide here. And so many people look at something like this and think, oh God, what a mess, isn't that awful? It's a real sign of urban decay. Look, burnt out houses, rubbish everywhere, all this awful scrub and weeds, quick, spray it off. Build it, tidy it up, cover it in concrete, nice new houses and stuff. And I think, no, these sites are so important for wildlife. There's probably more variety in a site like this than in any number of fields you might see over beautiful rolling Devon countryside. We really need sites like this. Yes, of course, there's antisocial behaviour and there can be issues with them. Of course there can. But we should treasure the wildlife that inhabits these kind of sites, not regard it as something that's awful and should be got rid of. So derelict land, critically important part of urban wildlife. Now, this is the 60th year of Devon Wildlife Trust, and a month or so ago I gave a talk as part of our AGM about the history of Devon Wildlife Trust, and of course I went back 60 years, but actually I went back double that length of time. I went back 120 years to the turn of the last century, because I think this is when the Wildlife Trust movement really started, and there's a reason for talking about this. This is very relevant to the whole urban agenda, because my personal feeling is that we get interested in wildlife when there's a threat, first and foremost. And these are the some of the founding fathers of the Wildlife Trust movement at this point, at the turn of the last century. And at that point, you did have organisations like the National Trust that had formed and were doing great things. But the National Trusts were really interested at that time in some of the more cultural aspects, the really important wild places great for our spirit, beautiful buildings, beautiful views, iconic landscapes, that kind of thing. There wasn't such a great interest in preserving site for wildlife's sake, be they beautiful, ugly, or not. And this was when that started to change, around the time of the last century. And of course, at this time, what you had, you still had some quite extensive tracts of wetland, particularly in the eastern side of the country. And these were being drained very rapidly. A lot of them had been drained centuries before, when those Dutch engineers were brought over in the late 16th, 17th century. but there was still quite extensive tracts being remaining, and people could actually see them shrinking and shrinking and disappearing to nothing. And that's really where this movement started in East Anglia. You get the first of these wildlife trusts and these organisations really concerned with protecting nature for nature's sake, focusing their attention on the east of England. And then what happened later on, of course, is we had the Second World War, and then after the war, two big things started to happen. One is that there was a huge growth in urban areas. So, of course, London, Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, Glasgow, of course, but also Plymouth, Exeter. You look at a picture of Exeter and Plymouth in 1950 and compare it to now, and it's just transformed. You know, the size of the cities have doubled. So people were seeing these urban areas growing, and this was seen very much as a threat in rural areas. And the other big thing that was happening, of course, was the industrialization of agriculture. So the green, bucolic English countryside was making way. The hedgerows were disappearing. The big machines were coming in. Labour was leaving the land. And so this was very much seen, this period, as a threat to the rural environment, and hence you then get a lot of wildlife trusts and other organisations starting up in the late 40s, 50s, and 60s, and we were one of those, Devon Wildlife Trust, to counter this threat. And then in the 70s and 80s, you get something else that starts happening. You suddenly get a third wave, and this is associated with wildlife in urban areas. And I think the reason for this is twofold. First of all, you're seeing a decline in a lot of the big industry. So, the London of my childhood, I remember from the very early 70s, there were big power stations all the way along the Thames, great big smoking factories. The Thames was dead, it really was. And there were many dirtier cities in the UK than London, where I was brought up. But and all that heavy industry was starting to decline in the 70s, particularly in the 80s. And that created a lot of opportunities, because you then got lots and lots of derelict land. The other thing that had happened a few years earlier, 10 or 15 years earlier, was the Clean Air Acts. So there was always been derelict land in places like London and other cities, but the air was so dirty that a lot of things just simply couldn't grow. And since the rivers and the air and the atmosphere and everything started being cleaned up, suddenly there were lots of great opportunities for wildlife. So you see this huge resurgence of wildlife starting to happen in the 70s and 80s. And with that, a great rise in the consciousness of people wanting to protect that. And I just love this picture here of London. This is, I think, somewhere in the London Borough of Hackney, and you see this big estate in the background, and it's stocking great stag standing up on a mound in front of it. And I just think that's fantastic. That's a total transformation from the London I remember. Now, in the early days of urban conservation, a lot of this was about fighting battles to protect the islands that remain. Now, this is a place, this is called Camrose Street. It's just north of King's Cross. And I used to work in the late 1980s, just north of King's Cross. And my God, it was a dive. I can tell you, you really wouldn't hang around here late at night. It was just, one of the worst, most deprived places you would find in a city anywhere in the UK. And now look at it, it's just amazing. You've got this Camrose Street Natural Park, it's called, not a nature park, a natural park. They've used that language very carefully. It's can be completely transformed, beautiful place, fantastic for nature. But the long and quite bitter battle was fought to conserve this area here. At the time, it had been a coal depot, and then it had been seen as, absolutely prime real estate for development. And it still proved to be that. But amongst these amazing new buildings, some which are behind where the photographer was standing when they took the shot, you also got this wonderful green space, which is so great for the people there. And it's made a huge, huge difference. And all over London and other cities, Oxley's Wood, Little Sydenham Wood, all sorts of, all over the cities, you've got these places which were saved as a result of really hard campaigning in the 70s and 80s. But despite a lot of that good work, we know that wildlife is severely threatened. It's as threatened in urban areas as anywhere else. And the Living Planet report, WWF, came out earlier this year, just a couple of months ago. And 69% decline in animal species, or about 70% when you're looking at all species between 1970 and 2020. And I really mind about this because I was born in 1967, so I was 3 in 1970. So my earliest memories are in 1970. So in my conscious life, this has happened. And you just stop and you think, oh my goodness, what have we allowed to happen? And it's, you know, it's awful, this, and you can really get caught up in a sort of negative spiral of thinking about what's happening in the Amazon and what's happening in the poles and, you know, what's happening to our bleaching of our coral reefs and all these things. And you can have this huge sense of helplessness. And I guess in a sense, when you look at these global trends, maybe we are a bit helpless, but I don't think humans were ever really evolved to deal with global problems. Where we are really effective is when we work together in small groups to do things locally. And I think in urban areas like Exeter, Plymouth, Torbay, that's where we have such a great opportunity to do that, because communities can have real control. I just put this other image here. That's a strawberry spider, and the reason for showing that is that actually, while we tear our hair out about primates and these animals, the groups that are most threatened are actually the invertebrates, and these are the basis of all life. Without invertebrates, to lose the tiger or the chimpanzee will be a huge tragedy. But to lose a lot of the invertebrates could mean full-scale ecological collapse. Now, there are a huge number of reasons for this. I think I'm just going to pull out one. I think this is the single biggest one. So this is the UK, and this slightly confusing pie chart here is intended to show how we look after our land at the moment. So our scientists tell us that we need about 30% of land and sea effectively protected, emphasis on that effectively protected for wildlife, if we're going to hang on to what we've got. So the blue is the 70%, that's the other bit, we're not going to worry about that for now. And the rest of the other slices of the cake are what we've got. Now, 8% of the UK is, or at least England and Wales, is legally protected for wildlife. So that's the 5 and the 3. But only 40% of that is in good condition. So a lot of Dartmoor is protected legally, but it's not in good ecological condition. So that's the grey 5%. So only 3% of the UK, or England and Wales anyway, only 3% is effectively protected. That means it's legally protected on paper and it's in the condition we want it to be. And if only 3%, 10% of what we need is actually properly protected, effectively protected for nature, no wonder we're losing species hand over fist. So what can we do about it? Well, the concept that a number of organizations came up with was this one of a nature recovery network. And this is now enshrined in law, which is a huge step forward. And you'll see on this picture here, this is deliberately done. This is the publication document. And you can see that it's not in a lovely national park or somewhere. This is slap bang in the middle of a big city, because this is where the drive needs to come from. And hopefully you can see there are lots of green walls, lots of green roofs, the idea, and as well as exciting birds of prey and other flocks of species flapping about the city skyscape. And this is exactly what I think we need to do to make this real, this concept real. So it's more, bigger sites, more of them, better condition and better joined together. And that's great as a vision, but we do need to have a strategy behind it. We need to have a game plan. And we've been working on this in Devon, as everywhere else has been. And we now have these things called local nature recovery strategies. And I know that Devon and Plymouth and Torbay and all the other local authorities around Devon are working together to try and create one of these. And this will set out the ambition and the targets for bringing back nature across Devon on its land and in its seas. Now, that's easy to say, not so easy to do, because we have to, first of all, work out what we've got. And would you believe it, that's pretty darn difficult, because it's in lots of data sets, lots of it's very out of date, lots of it's done to different scales. So a lot of work has been done to map exactly what we've got. And this is the map that shows what we've got. Rather large scale, so it doesn't pick up the detail, but it gives you a sense. A lot of small sites sort of peppered around the county. Then it gets a bit exciting, because you can then start using data sets to look at what you could create and where. And this is what I think has really changed in recent years. We have got much better remote sensing, much bigger computers, We can say far more about the type and condition of soils and areas that might be able to sequester carbon more, and areas that are a particular risk of flood and all the rest of it, the hydrology, all these kind of things we could do far more cleverly and overlay that data on top. And then we could say, all right, well, if you're looking at this point here, somewhere in the middle of North Devon or on the edge of Plymouth or just outside Exeter, wherever it might be, what could we create there most effectively? Do we want to create a wetland or plant trees and create a woodland? Or is it going to be a heathland or a chalk grassland or something else? And if it's going to be one of those, what type? And how big should it be? And how can we best connect these all areas together? So we've now got a really powerful tool that can help us do this much more cleverly than anything we've had before. Now, that's for the whole of Devon. Of course, if we want to get practical, we have to bring it down to a much more manageable scale. So here is a couple of rather crude images, one of Exeter and one of Plymouth, which show how this might be done. So these are just showing the types of habitat we've got there, but already. But again, you can start to see where you might be able to connect things up. And then over this, if you overlay our knowledge about new building projects which are coming online, new road developments, things like the flood relief schemes that have been going on in places like Exeter, you can then start saying, well, where have we got opportunities to build in some wildlife as part of this? Because every new housing estate, every road, every redevelopment, that's always got a chance to build some wildlife in it. And we can start to hook these different little islands of biodiversity back together again. So here's one thing I think was really important to do, is to create those linear features. Now, this is the Lee Valley in London. I like this because I used to work here in the late 1990s, and at that point it was a really bleak looking post-industrial site. It was a classic sort of album cover of dystopian Britain for the end of the last century. That Millennium Dome was nowhere to be seen, that hadn't been built yet. This was just an awful area, it really was. And now look at it, it's beautiful. And you've got 1,000 acres of protected land on this Lee Valley. It goes right the way from the Thames in the centre of London all the way out into the Hertfordshire countryside, and people can walk, sort of run, cycle 15 miles along this trail. It's extraordinary what's happened, and that's just been what's happened. Really, is no one's knocked down houses and rewilded places. Basically, what's happened is that just through clever sticking together of looking at opportunities to link bits of green space together, redesigning some areas, building in green space where new housing has been developed, and you create something like this. And we've got some examples of this going on down in Devon as well. So this is Northbrook Golf Course. It's an area that Devon Wildlife Trust is hoping to take on. You can see this, it doesn't look like this anymore, but this is what it looked like when it was a golf course, or when it's just about finished being a golf course. So you can see very short mown grass. We are hoping to turn this into something very different, and actually already does look like something very different. But the key thing about this is that just off the right-hand side of the slide, you've got Riverside Valley Park, the biggest area of green space you've got in Exeter. And just off the left-hand side of the slide, you've got Ludwell Valley Park, the second biggest area of green space in Exeter. So this is a key missing piece in the jigsaw. Bang, we put that in place, and suddenly we've created a green corridor which is 2.5 times, 3 times the size of what it was. Really exciting. The second thing I think we can do is we can make these areas that we've got much better quality. Now, you might have heard of this organisation called Landlife, and it started in Liverpool. It's done most of its work in Liverpool, but it started to spread elsewhere. And this, like many parks, the one that this lady's standing on enjoying the view of, when it was created, it was like many a Victorian park. It was set out in a very different time. This time, the urban environments were messy, chaotic, cramped places. And what people wanted was nice, orderly spaces where short grass and nice paths that people could walk along in their smart clothes and feel civilized, and that they were getting away from it all. And they were very important for Victorian London, or in this case Liverpool. But of course, things have changed a lot since then, and those kind of parks were fairly poor for wildlife. So what Landlife has done is come with all its wildflower seed and spread it everywhere, and look at all this. Well, absolutely wonderful, amazing. So I think we've got some great opportunities to do this. And this is exactly what the Green Minds project that Helen mentioned earlier on, and its predecessor, Active Neighbourhoods, have been doing. So here's one example, Paradise Road Field. You can see the kind of grass on the right. This is here, it's probably spring by the look of it, but with wildflower sowing, with all sorts of techniques you can use, you could restore some of these wildflower meadows. And with the wildflowers, of course, the trees, the fruiting trees, come the birds and come the insects as well. So we can start to green up these places that we've got all over Plymouth, Torbay and Exeter. And actually, if you look around cities, there are always spaces like this. There are so many sort of what I'd call redundant edges in urban areas. There are so many of them everywhere. There's always a side of a road, side of a railway, a bit of grass that no one's kind of done anything with for years, but it's just kind of been there because it's just there. Why do they have to be boring bits of, Coxfoot and Aranathra and Grassham? Why don't we create something that looks like this? And again, this is exactly the sort of thing that Green Minds has been doing, creating these little islands of wildflower meadow with all the insects and the colour and the joy that brings. Wow, let's have these everywhere, please. And of course, there's bringing back the trees that we've lost so much of. I feel so sad. Often I look at, in where I live, just south of Dartmoor, we are losing, I would guess, somewhere around 10 mature trees every year, because a lot of them died because they're ash, a lot of them died because they're elm, and others sort of senesce and fall over. And if it's all right if they're in woodland, they tend to get replaced. But if they're on the side of a road, if they're on a hedge, if they're in the middle of the field, they are seldom replaced. So we are losing these mature trees so much, and these are crucial, not just because they're great and they provide shade, but they're so important for bats, so important for birds, so important for all sorts of wildlife. So this project, Saving Devon's Treescapes, is really trying to tackle that. And one of the great things, as we all know about trees, is that the community engagement in planting them is great. Everyone loves to plant a tree. And it's not just about planting trees and us coming, or whatever organization's doing it, coming with our show and saying, yeah, here are the trees, let's go and plant them. We want to empower people to do this themselves. So we've now started up 2 community tree nurseries, community orchards, community tree nurseries, and here's one of them. And the idea of this is that we can actually start empowering communities to grow their own trees, plant their own trees, tend their own trees. Because there's nothing better than when the community itself takes responsibility and takes ownership for projects like this. And another great thing that Green Minds has been doing is training professionals. So there is people who look after schools, teachers. There's park staff in the local authority. There's the people all over the place who tend green space. They might be contractors, they might be organisation staff, any number of different things. But so often, the hedge is poorly managed, or the tree is pruned at the wrong time of year, or whatever, felled when it shouldn't be, not because of anything malignant, but just because of ignorance. So if we can teach people, if we can train people, what a difference that makes. So training the professionals here happening in Central Park, absolutely critical. And we have a wonderful new generation coming up who are so much more aware of the issues than perhaps my generation was, or other generations were. We also have a real issue in that a lot of the skills that were there in ID and identifying plants and animals and stuff are being lost. So training, providing schemes like this for apprentices and eco-awareness training that here is happening in Devonport Park, absolutely critical. Investing in the new generation, because here we've got such a concentration in our cities of people who really want to make a difference. So critically important part of the project. And I would also say a great thing that we need to be doing is raising our voice. Now, there's 2 different examples of raising voice, one past and one current. I'll talk about the past one first. So here on the right, this was called Petition Fish. So this was a campaign we ran, I think it was 10 or 15 years ago. And at this point, there was no effective protection of anywhere, any part of the UK coastline, with one exception, a little area around Lundy. Otherwise, nothing there was no effective protection. And this was all about trying to say, look, there are so many people who care about this. Government, you need to do something. On each one of those fishes, there is a little scale, and someone's written their name on that scale. And Hilary Benn, who is the Secretary of State at the time, had one of these petition fishes above his desk when he was, in Westminster, and that made an enormous difference. And we are good at this in Devon and Plymouth. There were more people raised their voices in favour of marine conservation zones than anywhere else in the country. Very proud of that. Now, here on the left is a current example. Now, this is, I don't know the rights or wrongs on this, I just know it's an issue. So this is the Armada Way, and I know a lot of people are concerned about what's happening in the Armada Way. Now, I only show this slide, this picture, because I'm fascinated by the fact that so many thousands of people, I think it was over 7,000, something like it, I think someone said to me it was a record for Plymouth, showed their concern about what was happening in Armada Way. Now, my hope is that that everyone raising their voices will mean that everyone comes to the table and we find a sensible resolution to this. I don't know enough about the details to know what that is, but I just make the point that people in cities raising their voices when they care about something is crucially important, and I really applaud everyone in Plymouth for doing that so effectively. Now we have some great opportunities in Plymouth and going forward, because there's the Plymouth, the redevelopment plan from the city centre, which I was enjoying having a look at earlier this week. Yes, there's everything to play for. So I think it's really critical at a time like this to set out what we think are our most important things for our city of Plymouth. And I think the first thing I would do, if I was in the position of writing this plan, would to say what is the core underlying values of this new plan we're coming up with. And I would say that one of these core underlying values is the importance of nature, and hence this phrase nature-based solutions. Nature is not just a nice to have. Yes, of course it's nice to have it, but it's not just a nice to have. It is fundamental for our carbon sequestration. It's fundamental for our health and well-being. It is fundamental for our water resources. It's fundamental for our life, let's face it. So we have to make sure that whatever we do in Plymouth is based around nature as much as it is based around growth, economy, employment, and all these other crucial things. And just today, actually, the Wildlife Trust issued some guidance about how new built development could look. And this is just obviously an illustration here. It's not a real place on the left. But the aim of this is to show that actually you can have fairly dense settlements with lots and lots of green space around it. So there's an awful lot of room for wildlife in this, albeit fictionalized landscape here on the left. It needs careful thought, careful design, but who wouldn't want to live in somewhere like that? But it's not just about the design, it's got to be properly protected, because so often what happens is you see new areas created, new woodland planted, hedges and stuff, and then a few years later someone comes and chops them down and concretes it over. So it's really important to protect this green space that we create. And a concept, wild belt, that we've been pushing is this idea of doing just that, is protecting the new green space that we've created. Because the trouble with triple SIs and these other legal designations is that they're fantastic, don't get me wrong, but they tend to protect what's already there. They don't protect the new stuff that we create. So we need to hang on to those gains. And the next thing I think we need to do is build with nature. And there is a scheme which a lot of organisations are now signing up to, including some in Devon and Plymouth, called Building with Nature. And I think there are two different pictures here. Neither of them are from Devon, actually. The left one, this is called Silver Lake. That's just outside Dorchester, beg your pardon, in Dorset. And the one on the right is one I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with if you frequent the M5. So this is the services just outside Gloucester. Now, these are two very different examples of how you can build with nature. One is incorporating space of nature outside the built area, and the other one on the right is incorporating space for nature actually within the fabric of the building itself. And there are lots of other ways of doing this as well, and that variety is great. But the principle is we can build, but we can build with nature, not against nature. Then, of course, I think we need to look at our green spaces and our waterways. And this is somewhere I went to see in London about 3 weeks ago. It's the River Quaggy, in southeast London near Kidbrooke Park. I remember I used to drive along here, and this was the most sad-looking thing in the 90s. It was just concrete on either side, loads of rubbish, upturned Tesco shopping trolleys. It was the sort of place that you would not be, really want to go anywhere near. And now look at it. It's only a tiny little area. It's sided either side by sort of steep, banks. It's not a huge amount of space, but what a difference. And if you can make space for wildlife in spaces this small, and you did this all over cities, what a difference that would make. And this excited me a lot. So I took this picture when just around the corner. So this is the same river, the River Quaggy, and obviously we had quite a lot of rain in November. And you can just see, if you look carefully, in the middle of that lake, a little sign. And that little sign is saying, welcome to I think it's the Kidbrooke Park, Kidbrooke Park or something. Anyway, so there it is, several feet underwater. But what's happened here is this is entirely deliberate. So the River Quaggy has been naturalized. So they've taken away the banks and all the culverts and everything else, and they've allowed it to run wild across this landscape. And this has done wonders. All right, if you wanted to play football here, wouldn't be so great, but there are other places you can play football. But downstream, what it's done to alleviate flood risk is huge, and the people around here absolutely love it because it was done with their blessing, in partnership with them. Let's see a bit more of that in Devon's rivers, please. Well, we don't need to hopefully wait too long because there are some examples. This one is actually from Exeter. So this is the River Northbrook, not far away from that slide I showed with the golf course. But this is a very culverted stream. I can't remember how many combined sewage outfalls go into the stream, but it is in the tens. It's huge numbers. And this is the vision we have for renaturalizing it. So you can see all the standing open water, the widening of the space, the variety of habitat being brought in here. And the aim of this is, again, it's about carbon sequestration, it's about water quality, it's about flood alleviation, and of course, creating that vital green space for communities here in the middle of Exeter. And this, if we can create this, will again link to other areas of important wildlife habitat up and create another one of these wildlife corridors that we so need. So yes, we need more of these kind of schemes too. And if we want to get really exciting, look at this in Milan. You've probably come and seen this before, some of you. So these are some skyscrapers in Milan where they've actually imported semi-mature trees and built them into the fabric of the building. Oh wow, wouldn't it be great to have some of that in our buildings here in Devon? And this is a concept, this is in China, this is a concept of sponge city, which you might have heard of. So this won a prize a few years ago. And the idea of sponge city it came about because a lot of these Chinese towns, like cities like Shanghai, suffer from terrible flooding because these enormous rivers like the Yangtze and the Huanghe, the Yellow River, draining from thousands of miles inland. And when it floods, my goodness, it floods. And yet they built their cities to be, concrete, tarmac. They just, they displace water. And where do they displace it to? Straight into the river. So what does the river do? It bursts its banks. So the idea of this is to build very much with the flood waters rather than against it. So sponge cities are there to soak up the flood water and build a city make it part of the city's fabric, not to try and displace the water elsewhere. Very exciting. Maybe we'll be looking at sponge cities here before too long as well. And one of the other major threats that we have for wildlife in this country, there's so many that I haven't managed to mention, but another of the big ones is what we do, the rubbish that we pour all over the land. So we spray more toxic chemicals over more area of our landscape than we have ever done before. It's just awful when you look at the number and the terrible cocktail of chemicals we pour all over the place. They end up in the soil, they end up in the water, and little wonder why our insect populations have collapsed and why we're seeing so many of the birds that feed on them's population collapse as well. Well, there are cities, 5 of them in France, Paris and Lille are 2 of them, which have banned domestic use of pesticides completely. There are many other cities across the world which are also following suit. Could we ban pesticides from our cities here in Devon and across the UK? What a massive difference that would make. And crucial to all of this, of course, is how we involve people. We've got very diverse communities here in Plymouth. But in other parts of the country, that diversity is really significant. And this is a project in Hull, which I just heard about a week ago, and it really inspired me. And it's called Welcome to English, and it's a joint venture between the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust and I think it's the Matthew Good Foundation. And here you have an awful lot of people who've come to Hull. They don't speak English. A lot of them have come from rural areas. They've never been to a city before. They are completely at sea in a place like Hull. And they don't know each other. They're socially isolated. And the idea of this project is to get them out into nature, to get them doing physical things. Wonderful environment for them to be in. Obviously, it's great stress relief because it's outside. Great opportunity for them to learn new skills and great opportunity for them to socialize. So this is creating many multiple overlapping benefits for these communities, and the scale that this project is doing it at is quite really impressive. So again, this is the sort of thing I would love. I know we're doing some of this in Plymouth and here in Devon, but it would be fantastic to be doing even more of that going forward. And then looking out to sea. We've got obviously our special area of conservation in our marine national park now in Plymouth. But how about a highly protected marine area where anything at all which damages the marine environment is stopped? And so here you see a left-right comparison, and within 4 or 5 years you can see this kind of transformation, absolutely extraordinary rate of which these habitats can recover, because of course it never gets below freezing, never gets too hot, never dries out. You know, it's fairly constant, the conditions in our marine environment, and that really helps nature recover so quickly. Wouldn't it be fantastic to see shoals like this in our seas just off Devon? And if we want to go even more ambitious, we could look at right beyond Plymouth, right the way perhaps across around the Devon coastline. This is a project in Sussex, which I heard about very recently, which really inspired me, and it's about bringing back Sussex's kelp. So here in Sussex, they'd lost most of their kelp in the 1980s when trawlers scraped it all off the bottom, and many of the fish disappeared at the same time. They had a few islands of kelp left. They mapped them all. They've banned trawling of this whole red or pink area along the Sussex coast, and the kelp is starting to come back. And the idea is that you will then get kelp right the way along that sort of 70-mile band along the southern coast of Sussex. What a fantastic thing. Why don't we try and do that here on the south coast of Devon too? And then looking beyond Plymouth and into the surrounding countryside, there's all sorts of interesting things happen between Plymouth and Dartmoor. You know, this is the famous tungsten mine, or infamous tungsten mine. And yes, mining, all right, we do need to mine for things, and mining is never a very pretty activity, but I can't help looking at a landscape like this and thinking, what a waste of all the land, or much of the land that happens that is in this slide here. Surely we could be doing some more exciting things with it. So I hope that as we go forward, and I know there's some exciting plans with the Plymouth Community Forest, that we could perhaps create a fantastic corridor which links the wildest, remotest parts of Dartmoor right to the centre of Plymouth, using landscapes like this, not regarding them as sort of awful impediments, things we have to work our way around, but actually working in concert with landscapes like this. It's perfectly possible to do. And I think perhaps my most, I'm nearly done now, but my most inspiring picture I've ever seen, or concept I've ever seen of this sort of turnaround, is the former Iron Curtain. So this is the Iron Curtain Trail. So this runs from the Baltic right the way down to the Adriatic. It's the longest green corridor anywhere in Europe, and it occupies this strip that was the Iron Curtain. 30 years ago, this was gun placements, concrete, barbed wire, death and despair, and now look at it. Fantastic, just in 30 years. So if we could all that, why don't we set our ambitions really high? This is a rather lovely picture. This is taken in Copenhagen. And the reason for Copenhagen is that Copenhagen is, by most accounts, the greenest city in the world. Well, to be the greenest city in the world might be a big ask, but perhaps we could make Devon cities, you know, our 3 cities of Torbay and Exeter and Plymouth. If we could have the 3 greenest cities in the UK, I think that's definitely something that we could achieve. So let's go for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Harry. That was amazing, and thank you for preparing a presentation that didn't have too many words on it. There's lots of amazing pictures. That was fantastic. So I've just got a few comments and questions. A couple, yeah, I'll just go through. There's a couple on the Armada Way and trees. So someone saying Plymouth's amazing with all its nature, woodlands, parks, etc., and lots of groups engaged. And they're concerned there seems to be a lack of support from the council, lack of funding. I mean, I can probably actually answer some of that, in that I guess the Green Minds project hasn't been directly involved in that process, but we are working with the council as they're the lead partner on the project. So yeah, we are working with groups, and we are talking to different groups, and they're getting involved with lots of the Green Minds activities. So, and the final bit of that is there a reason for optimism that Plymouth as a city and its council cares for a green Plymouth? So I suppose from my point of view, the Green Minds project is very much all about that. And I can't speak so much for other things that are going on. I don't know, Harry, if you've got any other comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know much about that. I did read with interest that report, and as you'll notice there, probably noticed that picture that I showed in the slide came directly from that report. I mean, you know, you need to talk to, I think, to all people. I'd want to talk to all people involved on all sides before I came to a conclusion. But I think what I would say is that it's always difficult in urban areas. You know, you've got to build stuff in cities. There's always stuff going on. All the great, you know, but all the great successes that I've come across in urban areas have often started with something that's pretty difficult. Because, you know, we don't generally notice things when it's all going fine. We walk past the woodland and everything looks fine. We don't jump up and down. We jump up and down when we think there's a threat to it. But that's always an opportunity to start a conversation. And so often these things are happening not because someone wants to thinks it's a bad idea to have trees, or they didn't give a damn, but just because, you know, that someone's got to do some work, and they've got a contract and a shorter timeline and very little money, and they just haven't had the time perhaps to think it all through. So the really important thing is that we all speak out when we see these things. We bring people to the table, we sort it out, and hopefully we end up with something that's even better than what we started with. And I think that's, we just need to regard it as the process. But it does illustrate the incredible importance of vigilance at all times, particularly in urban areas.
Thank you. And before you close down your presentation, there's just a couple of things related to slides, where someone's asking if it's possible to find a copy of the nature-based solutions poster. Do you know, is that available somewhere?
Yeah, no, it is. It's that's a publication. I think actually, if you go to the Wildlife Trust's national website, you'll find it up there.
Okay, well, I'll include a link to that perhaps in the follow-up email.
It's very much in the public domain. Yeah,
I'll try and get that to people after the talk. Another thing, I'm not sure I'll have time to go through this, but on your wild belt slide, I don't know if we can skip back to that one, but you had some markers, 15 red markers, and someone was keen to understand how each one of those will bring benefit to urban wildlife. I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah, no, I know the one you mean. Yes. I won't scoot back through it because I think it's about 15 or 20 slides.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so I showed a part of a publication that's just come out, and I think I could have given the key to it all, but obviously it would have been all small text, and I hate showing lots of small text in the presentation. But yeah, again, that is very much in the public domain, and it says it's saying things like green roofs, green walls, sustainable urgent drainage schemes, wildflower meadow. It's all that kind of stuff, you know, solar panels. I don't think there'll be too many things on that list of numbering that will be news to anyone on this talk. I think the key thing is just to remind you know, anyone who's trying to build that they should make space for all this stuff. And the clever thing is obviously how you design it all, because if you're, you know, a house builder, the reality is that you've probably, you know, you've got to make your money, because otherwise you go bust. You've got a limited amount of time, you've got all the difficulty with permissions, and you've got a limited amount of space, and obviously there are targets to try and build a certain number of houses. So how on earth do you square all of that? So I think we have, although, you know, it's easy to look at these guys as these people as the bad guys, I think, you know, on occasion they are, but I think probably the more constructive thing ultimately for us is to say, look, they've got a problem, they've got to fix. Our job is to help them fix it. And if we can make it easy for them and say, actually, this isn't so much more expensive for you, you know, you're going to make a much better, more attractive, more popular housing development if you do it this way, and it doesn't, and this can solve you a problem, not cause you a problem. You know, these dialogues can take a number of years. I went to one I mentioned Kidbrooke Park earlier on, and I think they've been talking to the house builder there, who's Berkeley Homes, for about 10 years. But the end result is really quite spectacular. So it's worth being patient.
Thank you. Do you want, if you want to stop sharing that, your presentation now,
yeah, sure,
might be good. Someone, yeah, while there's somebody who's just saying there's a good chapter on urban versus countryside in a book called The Disappearance of Butterflies, which I hadn't heard of that, by Joseph H. Rykolf, and that's someone from Butterfly Conservation in London, which they've managed to collate data showing that butterflies respond well to improvements in parks. Another question about Devon Wildlife Trust engage with groups in Plymouth. I mean, yeah, I could say a little bit on that through the Green Minds project. We're working with Plymouth City Council, but also community groups. So, for example, at Dereford Community Park, we're supporting the setting up of a community tree nursery. So that's quite an exciting project that we're working on. And we're working quite closely with the council on, as Harry alluded to, improving the way that meadows are managed to make them as biodiverse for wildlife as possible. So we're advising and supporting on that as well. So there's lots of things going on, and I'd urge people to look at the Green Minds Plymouth website to find out more about those sorts of projects, because there are many groups doing lots of amazing things, and so we're trying to sort of bring some of that together, really. If you've got any other questions, please pop them in the chat. I'll just try and get through them, but also if you have any feedback on tonight's talk, we'd be really welcome any comments and feedback to help us with future events, so pop those in as well. There's a couple of people saying thanks and inspiring, informative talk. Do Devon Wildlife Trust attempt to influence cemeteries to become less desert-like? I'm not sure. I mean, I know that we are doing some work at the Western Mill cemetery in Plymouth, linking with that. I'm not sure of any other examples around the county. Do you know, Harry?
We certainly do some things in some parts of the county, yeah. And whoever made that point, I mean, yeah, you're so right. Cemeteries are classic examples of where there's really nothing to be lost from making them more wildlife friendly. I spent some time a couple of years ago with in my own village talking about the management of our churchyard, and it's just so much better for wildlife now. And actually it's saved an awful lot of mowing time, but for some reason we get ourselves and talk ourselves in a position that it has to be all mown crop grass, because otherwise it's not tidy, and people will complain. Well, who's going to complain? Maybe 2 or 3 people complain. I bet there's 200 or 300 people will be very pleased. And anyway, if you've got somewhere, you've got a big cemetery, you can have spaces that can be neat and tidy short grass if you want. You can have spaces that aren't. You know, sometimes only changing 10% of an area can make a massive difference. I should just say, actually, Helen, someone's written to me direct, I think it's Dave, has said, you have to be careful not to destroy important habitats when you create wildflower meadows. Green Minds have been guilty of this in Plymouth due to lack of engagement with local groups. Yeah, hopefully that's been a minority of cases. Yeah. But I mean, Dave, you make a very good point generally, in that, yeah, you know, there's usually something there. And it's very difficult, you know, one's very rarely creating something out of nothing. The reality is that usually changing something to something else. And we have difficulty with this in some of our nature reserves sometimes. So for instance, if you have a hedge which is really important for, let's say, brown hair streak butterflies, and you want it to grow out a bit, but the field which it's encroaching on is incredibly important for wildflower meadows, and you've got 1 or 2 very rare plants there. You know, would you flail the hedge or do you not? And you know, these kind of compromises are quite difficult. And going back to that derelict land point, I mean, personally, I love derelict land. Derelict land is not very popular with planners and many people, but derelict land is great for wildlife. You know, you can clear it all and turn it into a nice, neat looking meadow. You might not have actually got much more wildlife there. You just exchange one thing for another. So you're absolutely right. You know, you have to think very carefully about the balance. And I think looking in the greatest scheme of things, I would just say, you know, it's omelets and eggs. We're trying to create bring wildlife back across the whole cityscape. And so sometimes we have to accept there will be some change in particular places, but we've got to make sure in individual places, we've got to make sure that it's making the whole city a better place for wildlife.
Thank you. Yeah, and just one other thing on doing the things in appropriate places. We work closely at Devon Biodiversity Record Centre, are very involved with the project as well. So we've done as much baseline sort of survey monitoring, and we're doing training and upskilling of volunteers and community groups to sort of look at their own patches and be able to use simple sort of methods to see what they've got and before actually doing anything. So we've got loads of questions, so I'm just going to skip through and pick out and see if I can pick out any more. I'll keep some of the chat, and where people have asked for information, I'll try and include that in our follow-up email. Somebody's saying, could you say anything about the water and wetlands in Plymouth? We have lots of tidal rivers, lots of streams, not heard much about groups looking into after those. Could be due to pollution, there's hardly any amphibians there anymore. I don't specifically know very much about that, and I don't know if you do either, Harry. But,
well, I mean, we've got, you're absolutely right, who's ever made the comment, we have some incredible wetland habitats in Plymouth. I mean, anywhere with, I think we sometimes forget that South Devon and Cornwall are, I wouldn't say unique, but they're highly unusual in the UK, and having all these RIAs, these flooded river valleys, which were, were because of the, changes in sea level and the bottom of Devon and Cornwall sinking, the seas come in, and that's created a number of unique environments. In fact, I understand, I've never seen it, but I understand that in the mud underneath the Tamar Bridge, there is a species of shrimp which lives there and nowhere else in the world, as far as we know. So there are some really fantastic areas. How you actually conserve them is pretty difficult. We've actually looked at taking on and buying one or two of these sites in the past, and we've realized that actually it's almost impossible to have any great influence on them. So because obviously it's the tidal cycle, it's what comes down the river, good or bad, pollution, mud, otherwise, and the boat traffic that goes in and out, and none of those we have direct control over. But yes, absolutely, acknowledging their importance, and I think allowing them to spread as well. So this is always a difficult thing to do when land is so valuable, but actually, particularly with sea level rise coming, whether we like it or not, we can respond by building great bunds and trying to keep the sea out, or we can actually say, no, let's welcome the sea in a sensible way, not trying to flood Plymouth High Street every Monday morning, but if we can accommodate the sea and these natural processes a little bit more, that actually will help us as well as nature.
Thank you. And it goes back to your sponge city slide, which I really enjoyed, the concept of that. Just a couple of things, actually we're just about done. So someone's asking what happens after Green Minds. Basically, as with all these funded projects, sadly, they do come to an end, but we're working now, and it comes to an end next summer, on a legacy follow-up, how we can continue the sort of urban nature recovery work that we're doing in Plymouth, but also in Exeter, and looking out, for the next sort of source of funding that can help support that sort of continuity of work. So we very much are aware of that. So something that was on our radar. But it's 7 o'clock, so I think we'll end it there. But I will send out a follow-up email, try and include some useful information for people. And I'd just like to say thank you so much, Harry, for joining us and giving such an amazing and inspiring and lots of stuff to think about talk. Thank you, and thanks everyone for attending and for your questions and your interest. And hopefully we'll see you again at future events. So thanks. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.